Welcome to Conversations with Dr. Stephen Greer. It's brought to you by the World Puja Network, and my name is Dr. Stephen Greer, and I am joined today by Dr. Ted Loder, the Science Advisor for the Orion Project, and he is on the board of the Orion Project as well, and I'd like to thank you, Ted, for being with us today.
Hey, good afternoon, Steve. It's fun to be back on the World Puja Network again.
Well, today what we want to do, there's a lot of breaking news from the Orion Project that we want to have people informed about, and not the least of which is that we are just completing today an in-depth overview of these energy technologies that have been kept away from the public for nearly 100 years, that we are putting together for members of Congress and the Obama administration. And I want all of you listening to hear what I'm about to say very carefully. There's going to be a PDF version of this at the orionproject.org that you can link to a fax to your member of Congress and to President Obama and your senators. And we will actually have a system up at the orionproject.org so that you can fax at no charge to yourself directly into the office of each member of Congress and your representatives and senators, as well as to the President, so that they get a letter from you hearing about why there needs to be a real refocusing of the discussion on the new energy economy and on the stimulus bill and on energy technologies away from the fantasy of quote-unquote clean coal, which is neither clean nor useful, or biofuels, which are 3 steps forward and 10 steps backwards, or other means that are being discussed, because they're really talking about putting billions of dollars of our tax dollars into programs that are of very dubious value in terms of really fixing the environmental and energy crisis, while the solutions that are sitting in classified projects and also are known by a number of the people on the Orion Project team cannot be brought forward because there's a lack of funding support to do the research and development to get them into a form that would be available to the public and en masse. So this is something where you have an opportunity to step into this debate that's going on in Washington, and we think it's very important that happen, that we begin to register. I just heard last night from a man who works very closely with a number of the key members of Congress, as well as with the Obama administration, who said you need to get people to write letters because they need to hear from the public on this, because that's how it's going to get on their radar scope, and they're going to really take a hard look at it. So this is democracy in action. We're asking all of you go to the orionproject.org, and you will see that there will be a link to this new breakthrough energy briefing that we've put together, and Dr. Loder has worked for the last 10 days or 2 weeks on this very diligently, and that there will be a way for you to fax at our cost, by the way, directly to your member of Congress and to President Obama and to your senators, your opinion that this needs to be the focus on the energy funding and debate, and that we need to get this funding in place immediately, and that a small percentage of the amount of funds that they're talking about putting into energy initiatives, at least a small percentage of it, needs to go into these really out-of-the-box but very promising types of technologies that deal with water to fuel, like Stan Meyer's technology, that go into the zero-point energy technologies, that go into a number of systems that we have scientists working on who are gravely underfunded and cannot work together in a professional way because there's no central research facility that we've been proposing for the last year and a half to be formed. So you need to write and express your opinions to the President and to your members of Congress and senators, because if you don't hear from them, they're going to consider that it's not important. So I think this is where the thousands of people listening to the World Puja Network really need to say, I can make a difference now, and it won't cost me anything to do it but a little bit of my time. So we're asking for your help, and I hope that everyone can do that in the coming week or two.
Yes, just to pop in here, having been immersed in the thing, in the document for the last week or so, as Dr. Greer said, it's not that long a document. It's actually 25 pages with the appendices added onto it, which include a sample budget and a several-page bibliography of references in these energy technology fields. But it's a document. It's a general document. It's not a heavy scientific document because it's inappropriate. But it really, we talk about different categories of technologies that can be moved, that need to be developed, transitional technologies, electromagnetic type energy devices, and advanced propulsion systems are the three that we sort of focus on in a general sort of sense about what they're about. And then we talk about these strategies and policies that need to be put into place in order to develop these things and have them ultimately brought out. After that, we look into a little bit of the history of over-unity technologies, defining what over-unity is not perpetual motion, as some people think, and with a number of references to a number of the scientists and people who've worked in these fields. So people can go look up their own if they really want to get into it. Then we talk about the problems of a bit of the history of it, a little bit about the suppression or the reasons why we don't have these things today, even though they've been around for perhaps 100 years or so. And then we get into some of the strategic components that are necessary for any company or even the white world government to how to bring these how to do the research and bring these technologies out. And for example, how to avoid Section 181 of the patent law, which might just remove any developments from the public knowledge. And so we talk about that a little bit. And then some of the organizational issues, restrictions for people working on these. For example, we don't want any of these technologies and recommend they do not be used for any kind of weaponization or any weapons applications at all. And then we have a page and a half or so of just sample technologies, most of which the listeners of the World Puja Network, as well as the readers of the Orion Project website, are aware of. Solid-state generators, rotary generators, electromagnetic lifter technology, the Meyer technology, Stan Meyer technologies, and water-enhanced combustion stuff, as well as a number of other, also included a little interesting section on the Stubblefield Earth batteries and his communication technologies, I might add, developed in the late 1800s, early 1900s, 1902, for example.
Right, I think we have a photograph of
yes.
Tesla in Stubblefield there in 1908 with the Capitol Dome behind them.
It's actually 1902. That photograph was 1902 in Philadelphia.
1902, I'm sorry.
Yep.
So over 106 years ago,
yep.
107 years ago, where this was demonstrated, and yet, no action was taken because, as it's been famously said, J.P. Morgan turned to Tesla and said, look, if I can't put a meter on it, we're not interested. And, of course, Standard Oil and the Rockefeller interest did not want that to come out either. And nor did old man Westinghouse was reported to have gotten involved. By the way, I also want to remind listeners that in preparing this briefing that we've been putting together, I went back through some documents that I had gotten for the disclosureproject.org. And if you go to disclosureproject.org, you can see what we've done there historically. And I found some documents that were requests from the Department of Defense, the Pentagon, to the FBI, demanding that the FBI turn over the records, the secret papers of Nikola Tesla that had been stolen by the FBI at the time of Tesla's death. And the Pentagon wanted them so that they could study some of the really advanced electromagnetic systems that Tesla had worked on and developed, but that had been kept secret. And this is not a contested document. These were ones that we got from FOIA, Freedom of Information Act requests, and they were declassified. And I think it's very important for people to understand that this is not an urban myth, that this is the kind of chicanery and nonsense that's going on. And I think the other thing that's important to include in your letter to your congressmen and senators, but also especially to President Obama, who's calling for transparency in government and reining in the excessive secrecy that was the hallmark of the last administration. And that is, we have identified more than one top secret electromagnetic engineers, one of whom in particular has agreed to work with us. You've heard about this before, but who has been prevented by interest, corrupt interest, I might add, from building one of these electromagnetic free energy generators. We had a meeting with him here at my farm in Virginia in November, and our entire board of directors for the Orion Project was there with him. He agreed, and within 2 or 3 months could have created, with the budget and the funds we had on hand, one of these devices. And then as soon as he got back to where he is at his command, he was ordered to leave his command, and they sent him to some hellhole in Iraq and basically prevented him from working with us. And this was after his 5 immediate supervisors, or shepherds as they call them in the intelligence community, had instructed him to work with us. So someone reached in and prevented this brilliant physicist and engineer from working with us. This needs to be referenced in your letter. Let me be clear. It needs to clearly state that the Orion Project has identified personnel, scientists, who have built and know how to build these systems within 3 months or so for modest funding, and they are being prevented by the corrupt use of the National Security Act, and that only the president can really intervene to stop that. And so this needs to be cited in your letter, and you have got to express your views on this. I have asked this scientist if we can get the president to give him an order to work on these and to provide the protection needed for him to work on these systems with us, if he would do so. He said absolutely, because that's the top of the chain of command legally in our system of government, is the commander-in-chief, and that is, at this time, President Obama. So the buck does stop there, and we need to hold President Obama to his pledge of creating a new green energy economy and green-collar jobs, and also transparency in government, and reining in these abuses of the national security state that have been getting out of control for over 50 years, as Eisenhower rightly warned us about.
Oh, absolutely. And that's just one aspect of that's a very broad, important aspect of what we're talking about. And one of the reasons why we put this document together, so we can get some of this information out to other people, because other people in Congress and the Senate who frankly appear to be led by and informed by the standard energy producing peoples, oil, et cetera, and not being, in fact, actually information being kept away from them about breakthrough technologies that could make the difference.
Well, I think the other thing is that we're going to have to organize ourselves so that we have a voice in this. I mean, there are 2 ways to do this. The public can make contributions to the Orion Project, so we can do this independently. But unfortunately, to date, we've only received around $400,000 in donations, and we're very grateful for those people who have contributed, but you cannot open a research facility and put on full-time professional engineering and physicists and fabrication capability and equipment and Kawasaki analyzers and metal cutting equipment and a laboratory for $400,000. I mean, you simply cannot do that. And so we have inadequate funds. So we either have to find people in the private sector to provide the funds, or we have to say, or both, we have to say, all right, there's hundreds of billions of dollars that are going to go out the door in the stimulus plan, and there's tens of billions that are going to go directly into the energy issue. A little bit of that, some fraction of 1% of it, would jumpstart all this research and pull these resources together so that we could come out with solutions that are 1,000 times more effective than wind or solar or geothermal or any of these other solutions. But one of the problems is that when you look at how Washington operates, and I have a place in Washington, I go there every week, you see that at the table with these senators and congressmen and at hearings, there will be oil industry executives. There will be automotive executives. There are even solar panel manufacturing executives. Where are the people who are there representing these technologies? Well, there are none. And that's why we have to create a support base for there being a voice. And that means we, the people, have to weigh in, because we really don't have, Tom Daschle at a lobbying firm making $5 million and chauffeured around in a limousine to go around and make the case for us, because we can't afford to spend $5 million for lobbying. However, we can all send a fax letter to the president and to members of Congress and to the Senate, and if thousands of us do that, it will get on their radar scope. It really will. I was just told that last night by a very senior operative in Washington, and I think that it's time for us to step up to the plate and do it. And I think that if we don't do it, then we have no one to blame for it but ourselves for not having a voice in this discussion. So I'm really asking people to do this, because this, even the cost of the fax to be sent in is being borne by the OrionProject.org. And although we certainly appreciate your donation to the OrionProject.org, we have enough on hand to pay for this system, this automatic fax system, that will go right to the President's office and to your Congressman's office and the Senator's office. We'll have a sample letter there for you to use that you can then tailor-make to make it your own. And we also will have this briefing document on the energy issue as a PDF file that can either be attached or can be referred to in the letter so that they can link to it right away and read it. So we're going to have all that set up, and we're asking all of you to participate, because this is really how our society should work if we're purporting to be a democracy.
Absolutely, and this is sort of another stage in the efforts that the Orion Project is doing to bring this into knowledge, the information about these technologies, to people who can actually start to make a difference in terms of...
Well, and it was also pointed out to me that, while we certainly have access to a lot of officials in Washington, we can educate them on it, but if they don't hear from the public on it, it's not going to stay on their radar scope. They're pulled in so many different directions with so much going on with the economic collapse, the stimulus bill, 2 wars going on in Afghanistan and Iraq, and all the other issues that they face, that in order for this issue to really get in front of them, front stage and center, they're going to have to hear from you. And by the way, everyone who's listening in the United States has a member of Congress that is representing you and 2 senators. And, of course, then the President is representing all of us. So you can write to those 4 individuals at least, your member of Congress, your 2 senators, and the President, and express your concerns that the environmental discussion and the energy discussion needs to refocus into this area, and that there needs to be a modest amount of support for the research and development of these systems, for which in this briefing document there's a great deal of evidence and a great deal of articles that have proven that these technologies have existed and have been developed, but have withered on the vine or been actively suppressed. And that we need to change that dynamic, because that's where the real solutions that can create a sustainable civilization on Earth are going to come from. They're not going to come from the conventional wisdom that is there today in the alternative energy community or in the fossil fuel world. And so this is the time to make this initiative a reality, and I think this is why we're asking everyone to take responsibility and do this with us. And I think we'll see a very good response, frankly. I'm being told that since we've sort of primed the pump by having meetings over the last couple of weeks with folks that are connected to the administration and to members of Congress, that if they can hear from you, this will reinforce the message that we are getting to them in these more private meetings. And so we're asking you to do this because now's the time to strike while the iron's hot, as they say.
Particularly as the negotiations are going on between the Senate and the House in terms of working on this stimulus bill that you can't avoid hearing about. So this is a really very prime, critical time for this.
Right, and not only that, but you have to understand the executive branch, which includes the Department of Energy and the cabinet-level Department of Energy guy, Cho, who's been appointed by President Obama. There's a lot of discretionary funds. If they want to put a modest amount of their multi-billion-dollar budget into these sort of areas as a research and development grant and development project, that they can do so, and that's what we're recommending. We are not recommending that the research go on inside a government national laboratory, and the reason we don't think that's a good idea is that traditionally when that happens, it falls into a bureaucratic black hole and also ends up getting classified. This has happened over and over again, and so we think this needs to be a white world, civilian, funded through grants and what have you, so that it can be done without the bureaucracy and the corruption that goes on in the big government national laboratories such as Oak Ridge and Lawrence Livermore and Los Alamos and these other labs. That would be the worst way this could happen because it's the least likely way that there would be any results in the near term, and that would be just wasting funds. So we need to see that these funds are provided to our research entity or one that we can form as a consortium, and that I think that Aero, or the company we have that can put together the staffing to do this, can receive a grant. And this is done all the time. No one has any problem with $5 billion being spent as a research and development grant for Boeing or Lockheed to develop the next generation of fighter jet. And that's just to study how to build it, not to build it. But everyone, thinks, well, so why can't that be done for new energy research? It doesn't need to be done in an energy lab of the government where it's going to fall into the black pit of Calcutta. It needs to be done through the management with people that we know can pull this operation together and in a few months to a year have results rather than it taking a decade of waste and nonsense inside the government system. So that's another key point to make in terms of this whole discussion. And I think that the other thing that you can do is that your senators and particularly your member of Congress comes home to your district every weekend usually, and often we'll have meetings or we'll have office hours. You need to call their scheduler and ask to go in and personally bring the briefing document in and sit down with them and say, this is something you're concerned about. If there are 5 or 10 or 20 of you in your district that are interested in this, it will have more effect. So I suggest that you also do that. They are there to serve you. People do get meetings with their members of Congress. You just have to ask for it and be persistent, and I think that you'll get it. And of course, now a senator is harder because they represent an entire state, but your member of Congress, you certainly can get a meeting with. So, because they only represent a few 100,000 people as opposed to an entire state. So I think that you need to make some efforts in that regard, as well as writing these fax letters and what have you.
Well, there's your working orders. Orders to sort of help the cause. Things that you can do outside of just becoming aware. That's listening to this allows you to become aware of these things. Actually, participating in the political process is sort of the next step. So
Right. Well, Ted, you want to give us an update on some of the researchers that we're working with and some of the technologies that we're uncovering here in the last few weeks?
Well, sure. Several technologies that people that we've been working with, some with whom we've been working for a number of months, others that we're just in the process of becoming more acquainted with. One of the technologies that the listeners of the World Puja Network have heard about for a number of months is the Stanley Meyer technology, that of water to fuel, it's sometimes called, or the production of oxygen, hydrogen, Brown's gas from the breaking apart of water. We are still, believe it or not, we're still in negotiation with the team or the group that has Stan Meyer's materials. We're coming down the home stretch on that. It's been a long time. It's been discussions back and forth between our people and their group, and due to travel, for a number of complex reasons, it's taken much longer than we ever conceived it would. Nevertheless, we're still in the process and hope that sometime relatively soon, and I hesitate to how soon, but within 1 month to 2 months, we should have the whole thing settled. And interestingly enough, as a result of our publicizing, if you will, the information that we're working to get that technology, as a result of publicizing that on the World Puja Network and on the Orion Project website, et cetera, in our newsletters, we've had a number of people contact us who had either worked directly with Stan Meyer or had met with him and obtained information about some of his technology. In fact, we just had a gentleman contact us a week or two ago who had actually worked with Stan in his lab, an engineer. He worked with him for a number of years and wants very much to work with us to help us resurrect and sort of research and resurrect some of Stan's technology. So that's been one of the benefits of the Orion Project network and the World Puja Network, is that people are becoming aware of what we're doing, and suddenly people who haven't thought about this for years have contacted us and said, we want to help. I worked with Stan, or I met with him, and I have information that I can support you with. So that's been a tremendous bonus to us, and we hope to actually be able to use these people's ideas and have them work with us over the next few months to a year or so. So that's a very exciting aspect of what we're doing. The public outreach aspect is bringing in benefits. Another group that we plan, several of us are going to be meeting with in Canada sometime in the next few weeks or so, is at one of the universities up in Canada, Eastern Canada, that is working on electric motor technology. And we plan to spend a day with that team and to see what they have. What they have sounds very promising in phone discussions and looking at some of the videos they've sent us, but we won't know until we've actually met them in person. And sometimes you just have to meet in person to see, discuss, and test technologies. So that's one group. There's two groups several groups from Canada, actually. We'll be meeting with a second group in Canada as well, who have developed, as the gentleman I spoke with there says, I figured out how to allow to misdirect or change direction or turn off on the magnetic properties of very strong magnets, neodymium magnets. And if you can do that without costing a lot of energy, you can make a generator, because all you have to do is have the magnetic field flux through a coil of copper wire, geometrically designed appropriately, and you basically have a generator. And so we will be meeting with that team sometime in the next few weeks as well, and hope that we can start either obtain some of their technology and hopefully bring it to the United States.
Right, and actually you're going up there to meet next week with these folks, as well as another gentleman who's at a university in Canada who has made a type of system that we're going to see about him closing the loop on that, so it's a self-running system that's based on sort of a toroidal coil configuration, as I understand it.
This is the chap I first mentioned that has developed ways to do that, so we're very excited.
By the way, listeners, we would like to mention these folks' names, but they request that they be confidential, so that's why we honor their confidences. But these are all exploratory discussions, but they're very, very promising scientists, and we are also funding another electromagnetic scientist who is working on a generator for us and for the Orion Project, which we hope will be finished in the next couple of weeks, who is in the United States, who says in the past he's been able to build ones up to 50 to 75 kilowatts, although the one that he's working on for us would be 5 or 6 kilowatts because it's a more reasonable size generator to take around for demonstration and to various scientific laboratories and what have you, rather than a humongous 60 kilowatt generator. But he's working on this also, and we're hopeful that he will wrap up his research here in the next couple of weeks. And one thing I want to mention about the Stan Meyer water-to-fuel systems, as you know, he had a dune buggy, sort of a car running just on water. And a lot of people said, well, it was a hoax, it was a fraud. We're getting more and more information from folks who actually worked with him, who were either scientists or, in the case of this man who has surfaced, he was actually a sort of a master mechanic who took apart and reassembled that entire engine. And he said it absolutely really was running on water, and that it was running on water with no supplements. There was no hidden gas anywhere or anything like that. And just imagine if the hundreds of gallons of wastewater from your home could go into a generator to run electricity for your home, and there'd be no pollution. The only exhaust from running that engine would be water vapor, which can be recycled back into the tank through a condenser. You wouldn't even be using more water from the earth. You would be just using some of the wastewater from your shower and your sinks that could go through a charcoal filter system. The same thing for your car. You could fill up your car with that water, and if you can convert the engine to run on these internal combustion engines that are now putting out so much pollution and nastiness, could be running on a water system. And your only emission is water, which can, as I mentioned, be recycled back into the water container by condensing the water vapor into liquid water again through a system of condenser coils. So, these are amazing breakthroughs, which we know that there were a lot of military and intelligence entities that were interested in Stan Meyer's work before his sudden and bizarre death in 1996. And we even have a report from an aerospace PhD scientist in Ohio who knew one of the scientists from a British team who came over and tested Stan Meyer's equipment along with an admiral who was ordered to do so by the British Ministry of Defense, and confirmed that it really was running just on water, that he had figured out the electromagnetic frequencies, the correct voltage and the correct hertz or frequencies to dissociate with very little energy water into hydrogen and oxygen. And that is where the real secret lies. That's where the real, quote, magic is going on in those kind of systems. And it's a type of over-unity system, meaning that you're getting a lot more energy out than you're putting in because of the special nature of these electromagnetic fields and how they can break the bond between hydrogen and oxygen that's in water and turn it into hydrogen and oxygen gas, which can be easily burned in a very clean way without any pollution like you get from gasoline or diesel or coal or any of these other things. So this is an important breakthrough because we have over 1 billion motor vehicles on the road that are running on internal combustion type technologies that could be cleaned up. And there are a lot of electric generating capabilities and what have you that could be converted to this type of system using water. The other thing you could do with this is, because the energy would literally be free, you could then afford to desalinate water from oceans so that there would be no shortage of water. One of the big things facing the world today is the looming shortage of potable fresh water in the world. And there are a lot of large multinational corporations buying up water rights for this reason, and it's rather corrupt. However, 2/3 of the Earth's surface is covered with miles of ocean water, but of course it's not potable, and it can't be used for irrigation because of the salt. Now, the desalinization of seawater is something that's been done for decades. And there are actually very increasingly efficient ways of doing it. The problem is that it takes a lot of energy. But if the energy to do the desalinization can come from this type of system, then you can desalinate the water for irrigation, for drinking, and what have you, and also for energy. So this would be a real breakthrough in technology, and the more people that we meet with and talk with who had worked on this technology, the more we're convinced that it was legitimate. The question is whether enough of this, if we can assemble a brain trust of people who knew about these systems to work on it once we acquire it, to get it running again, and hopefully that all the components, particularly the electromagnetic resonance components, the sort of the electronics that really drove the process of breaking water into what's called Brown's gas or hydroxy gas, hydrogen and oxygen, that those components are still all there. And one of the things we're going to do is have some of these people who had worked directly with Stan Meyer, who have now surfaced, visit the facility where these things are being kept, and to assess that in fact they are intact and that they have not been tampered with or gutted of their key components. So this is part of the due diligence we're doing and will be doing in the coming weeks. And again, we do appreciate you making donations to the orionproject.org to support this work. We don't have any paid staff. All of us are doing this with our free time, but there are expenses associated with both acquiring the technology and paying the family that inherited it, what they're looking for, and also getting scientists to come and study it, and also these travel expenses. So any contributions you folks can make to the orionproject.org, I very much appreciate it.
Yeah, I'd just like to add a little a sidelight on Dr. Greer's comments about relative to the British military people, Admiral actually. The chap's name was Admiral Sir Anthony Griffin, and we've actually on the Orion Project, the orionproject.org, we have listed under the scientific research the report that Admiral Griffin wrote in 1993 as part of a lecture talking about Stan Meyer's technology. So if you have further interest in delving into a little bit more of the information that we've just given you, that's a good place to start.
Yes, and it's interesting because about every week or two a new source surfaces through the kind of outreach we've been doing through the World Puja Network, and I so much appreciate the folks at the World Puja Network for their generous support of what we're doing at the orionproject.org. Because what has happened is that it's begun to create a core team of scientists and people who have really credible information on Stan Meyer's system and how it worked. But as we're disclosing here today, some people who'd worked directly with Stan Meyer, with the actual equipment, hands-on, while he was still alive. And these are very, very important members of a team that we will have to assemble once we acquire this equipment, because, it's been sitting there for 12 or 13 years and not been used or run. And, it's not as if there's going to be a how-to manual because Stan Meyer died very suddenly, and everything was sort of left in a state of disarray. So we feel that this is an important technology to resurrect, but we're becoming more and more confident that we'll be able to do that because of the caliber of people who are surfacing, who had information on the testing of the equipment that shows that it was legitimate science, but also people who directly worked on it. So these are really important breakthroughs.
Absolutely.
And I also want to mention that I've recently had someone surface who is working with a man who had worked in some of the national laboratories and some corporations on these more advanced anti-gravity and zero-point energy or free energy electromagnetic generators. And we're in the process of negotiating with that team to have him receive a grant from the Orion Project to build within about a 3-month period one of these systems. This is something that has been breaking over the last 72 hours that even people on the Orion Project board are not aware of, but they're learning about it now. This is a very important prospect, and it just gives an example of the kinds of people who are surfacing that have information and have worked in projects. As I referred to, we have this gentleman that we met with in November for about a week here out at my farm in Virginia, and who has since been blocked from building the system he had promised he would build for us. But now this other gentleman has surfaced who is a generation or so older than this man that we met with in November, who had worked for some decades ago on these systems, and who apparently is willing to explore working to build one of these systems for us with a modest amount of grant funding and on a very limited timeline, i.e. within 2 or 3 months. So we'll let you know how that proceeds. This person is, of course, held top secret clearances and is rather a little bit skittish about doing this because of security concerns, but seems to be willing to move forward. So these discussions are actually happening this week with this particular scientist who has worked had worked for many decades in those projects. And over the years, as you know, through if you go to disclosureproject.org, you'll see that initially I had a dozen or two of these sort of people who had worked in these kind of projects. Now I have about 550 scientists and military people and intelligence people who know about what has been called WSFM, weird science and frickin' magic, that's done in some of these classified projects and in these corporations and Lockheed Skunk Works. And what we're finding is that there's a steady flow of information and now people stepping forward. And what we have to do is provide the analysis of what they can do, and then, if possible, the support, the funding support, so that hopefully with the means that we have available at our disposal today, we can actually get a prototype built so that then we can have something to demonstrate to other sources of funding or to the government or to private funders to really get a professionalized operation going. So that's what we're trying to do. I mean, until we have enough funding to open a laboratory, an experimental research and development laboratory here near the University of Virginia, we feel the best approach, or really the only approach left open to us, is to explore the possibility of providing limited grant funding to people who have either proof of principle objects or devices that we can see that can work on building a robust generator, or who have a history of having done so within projects and who are now willing to cooperate. So hopefully this person will stay on track and will not be waved off the way the gentleman that we met with here out on my farm for an entire week with my board of directors. We were rather disappointed, of course, that happened, but it wasn't surprising. And I think this is one of the reasons why, if the President of the United States or the House Intelligence Committee or someone like that wants to have an inquiry into this, I'm very prepared to go to Washington and share the names of these people and say, look, these people need to be put under an order of protection, and they need to have their security provided, and they need to be specifically requested by the President to work on these projects as a request or an order, as an executive order from the Office of the President. At that point, if anyone tries to order them not to, they will be contravening an order from the United States President, who's the Commander-in-Chief, which is illegal. So I think we have got to kick this up to a level where people who want to come forward and work with us, like this gentleman in November who was ready to go, cannot be intimidated and stopped in the tracks like he was. That this is a crime against humanity. It is an illegal use of the National Security Act. It is the abuse of that system, and it isn't going to be able to be ameliorated until we get some real support from officials in Washington who are responsible for these things and who need to look into it and make inquiries into it. And this is, again, getting back to the beginning of the discussion today, why it is so important that the listeners at the World Puja Network write to their members of Congress and to Obama and ask the President to look into this matter And believe me, if there's sincere interest on the part of the President or a member of a relevant oversight committee in the Congress, I will provide them with all the information, documentation, names, addresses they need to check out these scientists and get them protected and get them working on this for the benefit of humanity and the benefit of Earth. That's what they need to be doing. And by the way, that's what they want to do. And so I think that we have got to step forward and say, look, it's time for our leaders who are now part of this system to step in and correct these abuses of power and to fix these excesses of secrecy and to provide the means and the protection for these types of scientists who are really brilliant and quite heroic to come forward and work on these technologies for the benefit of all of humanity and of the Earth and to create a sustainable civilization where we really start a new chapter in human history. This is what we can do, and this is the real change that everyone is waiting for.
One thing to keep in mind that one thing that keeps us going and working on this thing is the following issue, that if you didn't know anything about this and the potential and possibilities of energy technologies and creating a new world in terms of energy technologies for this planet, if you didn't know that the possibility exists, you wouldn't be blamed, or you really don't have any sort of responsibility for making the change. But once you become aware that these potentials, the potential for changing the whole energy dynamic on the planet is there. Once you understand that, you're really majorly remiss if you don't try to help that change, help affect that change. And that's what the Orion Project is doing.
Right, and that's how change has to happen. And you know, we're working this from every angle we can, whether it's again trying to get previously running systems like Stan Meyer's up and going, or supporting inventors with modest grant support to build systems that they can on their own in their own limited labs or garages or whatever. But ultimately, there's this other approach, and that is getting the President and Congress educated on this and to get them to step forward and put a stop to the abuses of the National Security Act and to make it a national security priority to disclose this information and these technologies and to get these scientists ordered to work on a white world as opposed to covert world project that would be like an Energy Manhattan Project, except for the purpose of not creating weapons, but of creating an entirely new energy system to create a new civilization. And, you know, one of the things that has come out recently, there was a very eminent scientist who had been warning of global warming who recently said that all the solutions that are being proposed are too little, too late. And while many people found that rather depressing, I found it to be encouraging because people are finally waking up to the fact that, you know, you're not going to fix these, you know, when you have 6.5 billion people wanting to drive cars now, and you know, in India and China rapidly industrializing, you have a new coal-fired power plant being put on every week in China, every single week a new coal-fired power plant. That, you know, putting a few wind and solar farms in the Midwest ain't going to cut it. It just isn't.
Definitely.
And moreover, the problem, the geoeconomic realities are that the level of poverty in most of the world is such that these very expensive solar and wind solutions are ones that they're not going to do. In fact, I've looked into trying just to turn my home into a really self-sufficient solar and wind house, and it's upwards of $100,000. Now, how many Americans can plop $100,000 cash on the barrelhead for something like that? When instead, if we get these technologies out, they could buy something like a heat pump that's a few $1,000s that would replace all their energy costs and give them free and clean energy from the 0 point or from water, in this case of Stan Meyer's things. So what this scientist was saying is that the solutions that are being talked about are going to not arrive in time and not be able to be disseminated widely enough by a rapidly industrializing world that is doing so using 1800s era coal and oil and fossil fuels. And so we have to bring some new thinking to this. And this is what your letters to President Obama and to your members of Congress needs to reflect, that there needs to be fresh thinking and out-of-the-box thinking for these solutions. And that, if that gets looked at carefully, and there is a great deal of evidence that Dr. Loder and others have assembled in this briefing, then they'll realize that, well, gee, we're not asking that the $50 billion in the energy part of this stimulus plan go to what we're wanting to work on. But if some tiny, basically the rounding error amounts that are usually wasted at the Department of Defense on paper clips would be enough for us to set up a laboratory and fund this properly. So I think that it's time for the people who are learning of these technologies and understand they are real and have existed for many decades, raise up with one voice here very quickly and make those voices heard in Washington. And perhaps then it can help begin to turn the direction of this discussion around to real solutions as opposed to pseudo-solutions that will be too little, too late.
Or just not even directed in the right direction.
Right. I mean, they're talking about spending tens of billions of dollars on clean coal. And, first of all, it wouldn't be clean coal. Secondly, it has never been done and proven to be able to be done. Thirdly, where's the coal coming from? Well, and if you look at the reports that have come out in all of the eastern United States, as well as out west, they get the coal out of the earth now through what's called mountaintop removal, and they literally blow up the entire tops of all these mountains. So these huge, giant scoopers can scoop the veins of coal away, and then they dump all the detritus and debris into the valleys and streams, and it is absolutely devastating in huge areas of the eastern United States mountains in Kentucky and West Virginia and other places where there's coal. And so even if you burn the stuff in a clean way, which has not been proven to be possible, the way you're getting the coal is absolutely an environmental holocaust. And so, the kinds of tons of money and the tens of billions of dollars we're talking about dumping, it's just sheer pork barrel nonsense. And I think that the people need to say, whoa, wait a minute. If you're going to spend, 30 or 40 or 50 billion dollars on investigating and supporting the coal industry, why can't we take 1% of that or a fraction of 1% of that and put it into what the Orion Project and the scientists that we've found can do in a matter of less than a year that would make coal and oil obsolete? Why not? And I think that, when they don't do it, we need to keep the heat on them to do it, because I think that this is, after all, our tax money, and it is really being mortgaged on the backs of our children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren. We have $11 trillion debt. And our civilization is simply not able to withstand the kind of dumb thinking and old consciousness and bad science, frankly, that has caused policy to be so perverted. I mean, there has been a perversion of policy against the public interest into these sort of insane non-solutions, and that's mostly through the corrupting influence of lobbyists and big energy sector, fossil fuel sector influence. And this is something that the people have to stand up with one voice and say, enough. Here's a new solution. Let's not just criticize what's happened. Let's say, let's take a new direction, because here are some great solutions that need a little bit of support.
So that's our goal, and boy, that wraps this discussion up very nicely. It's here's an opportunity for the listeners who have been perhaps passively listening and on some part and just learning to actually take an active step in acquainting our government officials, their own government officials, in terms of the possibilities and the potentials out there.
Yeah, so I would like to thank everyone for your help and support, and I'd like to encourage all of you right now, as soon as this interview is over, to go to theorionproject.org. That's the Orion, ORION project.org, and make a contribution to the Orion Project so we can continue to do this research and support these inventors and acquire the Stan Meyer equipment and all the other things we're doing. But also write to your members of Congress and to President Obama. There will be a section on the website that will have some sample letters that you can customize and make your own, and then you can fax that letter directly to their office at our expense, at the Orion Project's expense, and it will go in as a fax, which is much more effective than a letter in the mail because those go through so much security screening, and usually are tossed out. So I think that what you want to do is do that in the next day or two, and then tell all of your friends and family and everyone on your email list and in your email address book to go to the OrionProject.org and get them to do it. So if we have 1,000 people listening who tell 10 more people, we could have tens of thousands of letters, faxed letters going to the President and to these members of Congress at exactly the time that we're giving them these briefing materials. And you can include the PDF file of this energy briefing document that will be on the website, and that will be referenced in the letter. And so they can go to the Orion Project and click on that link, and they'll have it. So I think that this is how we need to function. It works very well in many other grassroots efforts, and it's time now that we start our own grassroots effort for new energy and new solutions that will really transform our civilization into a sustainable and peaceful world, and a world that we can finally say is going to be able to function in a just way, eliminating poverty, and also to sustain the earth and clean the earth. Because as soon as we stop abusing Mother Earth, she has the ability to correct many of the problems, and we just have to lift the burden from her, and we have not been doing so as we should, and as we know we can. So this is the time to do it, and I'm hoping everyone will respond to this call to action that we're issuing today. So I would like to thank all of you for your help and support, and I thank the World Puja Network for hosting us and giving us this time to share the updates of what's going on at the OrionProject.org. And thank you for listening to Conversations with Dr. Stephen Greer. It's brought to you by World Puja Network, and I'd like to thank Dr. Ted Loder for joining me and sharing with all of you the updates on our energy research efforts.
Thank you, Steve, and good night, everybody.
Thank you. Bye-bye.